desperate pilot buys a ruined station to drink himself dead, until a galactic siren sparks his fire. Jake Drifter Malone, a washed-up war hero, thought he'd found the perfect grave in a rusted space station, until Vara Kael, a fiery Galactic Alliance enforcer, storms in, dragging him into a cosmic battle that could reignite his long-lost flame. Watch now and share your thoughts in the comments below. Can Jake rise from the ashes with Vara by his side? Welcome to Alien Whisper, where sizzling hot alien women and emotional sci-fi alien stories await you. If you enjoy thrilling adventures between humans and extraterrestrial beings, don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a comment below the video. Now let's dive into the story. In the dim, smoky haze of the rusty nebula, a rundown space bar floating on the edge of the Orion Arm, a single beer bottle sat on the scratched-up wooden counter, its frosty glass glinting under the flickering neon lights. The green glow of the sign buzzed overhead, casting a sickly sheen across the bar's grimy surface, where empty cans and spilled liquor formed a sticky graveyard of last night's regrets. For most of its short, uneventful life, that beer bottle had been just another cold drink waiting to be guzzled. But in the final 10 seconds before its doom, something miraculous happened. It gained sentience. In that fleeting moment of cosmic clarity, the bottle's tiny mind raced with grand thoughts. "I'm the king of all beers," it mused, its inner voice sounding like a philosopher who'd had one too many. A noble warrior in the eternal battle against thirst. But now, I see my fate, swallowed by some washed-up drunk who won't even remember my name. It wasn't wrong. A big, scarred hand reached out from the shadows, fingers rough and calloused from years of gripping ship controls and bar fights. The hand grabbed the bottle, tilting it back as the man chugged it down in one long, greedy gulp. The cold liquid slid down his throat, and with a satisfied grunt, he slammed the empty bottle back onto the counter, hard enough to rattle the pile of dead cans around it. He let out a loud belch, the kind that echoed through the bar like a foghorn, cutting through the chatter of spacers, smugglers, and lowlifes, drowning their sorrows. That man was Jake Drifter Malone, 42 years old, with salt and pepper hair tangled like a bird's nest after a storm, wearing a beat-up leather jacket that smelled of engine grease and cheap whiskey. His brown eyes, cloudy from too much booze and too many bad decisions, stared blankly at the counter as he wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. Jake used to be somebody. Back in the Orion War, he was a hotshot pilot, a legend whispered about in every dive bar from here to the core systems. They called him Drifter because he could drift through asteroid fields and enemy fire like it was a damn dance, taking out 3 Zarian warships with nothing but a rusty scout ship and a plasma pistol that jammed half the time. Kids begged for his autograph on spent shell casings. Women threw themselves at him in port towns. Hell, even the Galactic Navy gave him a medal once, though he pawned it years ago for a crate of beer. But wars end, heroes fade, and now Jake was just another drifter in the literal sense. A washed-up nobody bouncing between systems, living off losing bets and the ghosts of his glory days. Tonight, in the rusty nebula, he was down to his last stack of credits, sitting across from a greasy smuggler with a shark-like grin and a deck of cards that Jake was pretty sure were rigged. "Last hand, Drifter," the smuggler said, his voice dripping with mockery as he fanned out his cards. A winning flush, all spades, gleaming like a knife in the gut. Jake glanced at his own hand. A pair of 2s and a bunch of junk, barely worth the paper it was printed on. He leaned back in his creaky chair, the leather of his jacket groaning, and shrugged. "Take it," he muttered, sliding his stack of credits, his whole damn savings, across the table. The smuggler laughed, a harsh, grating sound, and scooped up the pile. "Thanks for the donation, pal," he sneered, pocketing the credits with a flourish. Jake didn't flinch. He just grabbed another beer from the counter, popped the cap with his thumb, and took a long swig. "Doesn't matter," he said to no one in particular, his voice rough as gravel. Wasn't planning on living long enough to spend it anyway. The bar spun around him as the alcohol hit, blurring the faces of the other patrons into a mess of shadows and noise. Jake was halfway through his beer when his bleary eyes caught something on the cracked screen of the bar's communal tablet, propped up against a stack of coasters. It was an ad from the dark net, flickering with static, abandoned space station for sale. Dirt cheap, perfect for retirement, or a scenic suicide among the stars. He squinted at the price tag, exactly what he had left after selling his old ship, Rusty Betty, a beat-up junker that had been his home for a decade before he traded it for scrap last month. A dry, humorless laugh rumbled out of him, loud enough to make the guy at the next table glare. Why the hell not? Jake mumbled, wiping beer foam from his stubble. A place to drink myself to death in peace. Sounds like my kind of paradise. His thick fingers fumbled over the tablet's grimy screen, tapping through the purchase with the sloppy precision of a man who'd done too many deals drunk. He didn't bother reading the fine print. Contracts were for suckers who cared about tomorrow. With a final swipe, the station was his, a confirmation ping lighting up the screen. Ownership transferred. Coordinates sent. Jake chuckled again, a low, crazy sound that made him sound like a guy who just bet his soul and won a handful of dirt. He finished his beer, tossed the bottle into the pile of empties, and stumbled to his feet, the room tilting like a ship in a storm. Time to go home, he said aloud, grinning at nothing, and grabbed his duffel bag, a patched-up sack stuffed with a few beers, his trusty plasma pistol, and a deck of cards so worn you could barely see the suits. Morning came like a punch to the skull. Jake woke up sprawled across the bar floor, his face pressed into a puddle of something sticky he didn't want to identify. His head throbbed like a busted engine, his mouth tasted like ash, and a skinny bartender was kicking his leg with a steel-toed boot. "Get up, you drunk bastard," the kid growled, his voice cutting through the fog in Jake's brain. "Your ride's here." Jake groaned, rolling onto his back, the neon lights stabbing his eyes. "Ride?" he croaked, then remembered the station. He'd actually bought the damn thing. Forcing himself upright, he snatched his bag and staggered out to the docking bay, where a rickety cargo shuttle waited, its hull patched with duct tape and hope. The pilot, a grizzled old spacer with a cybernetic eye, didn't even look at him, just jerked a thumb toward the back. Jake climbed aboard, the stench of oil and sweat hitting him like a wall, and slumped into a seat as the shuttle rattled into space. Through the scratched-up window, he watched the stars streak by, a blur of light against the black void. After an hour of bouncing through hyperspace, the shuttle slowed, and there it was, his new home. The space station loomed ahead like a junkyard monster, a hulking mass of rusted metal and cracked panels drifting in the middle of nowhere. Giant circular structures, like broken wagon wheels, jutted out from its sides, spinning lazily in the vacuum. It looked like something the galaxy had chewed up and spat out, forgotten by everyone except the fool dumb enough to buy it. The shuttle docked with a jolt, the airlock hissing as it sealed, and Jake stepped out onto the cold steel floor, his heavy boots clanging in the silence. The air smelled of burnt wiring and stale dust, and somewhere nearby, he heard the faint drip of a leaking pipe. "Sweet damn home," Jake muttered, his voice echoing off the walls. He dropped his bag, the thud reverberating through the empty station, and took a look around. The place was a wreck. Wires dangled from the ceiling like guts, lights flickered like they were on their last breath, and a control panel in the corner hummed faintly, its screen covered in a layer of grime. He kicked an empty canister across the floor, watching it skitter into a pile of debris, and pulled a beer from his bag. Popping the cap, he took a swig and leaned against the wall, staring out a cracked viewport at the endless void. This was it, the end of the line. A place to drink until the stars burned out or his liver gave up, whichever came first. For the first time in years, Jake felt a twisted kind of peace settle over him, like a man who'd finally found the perfect grave. But as he stood there, sipping his beer and staring into the dark, he couldn't shake the feeling that the station was watching him back. The hum from the control panel grew louder, a low buzz that vibrated through the floor, and out in the distance, those giant rings seemed to shimmer faintly, like they were waking up from a long sleep. Jake shrugged it off, chalking it up to the booze playing tricks. "Just me and the quiet," he said, raising his bottle in a mock toast to the emptiness. He had no idea how wrong he was. Jake Drifter Malone stood in the middle of his new kingdom of rust and ruin, the stale air of the abandoned space station clinging to his leather jacket like a bad memory. The echo of his boots on the steel floor had faded, leaving only the faint hum of the station's dying systems and the drip, drip, drip of some unseen leak. He took another swig of beer, the cold fizz cutting through the dryness in his throat, and let his eyes wander over the mess he'd bought with the last of his credits. The place was a disaster. Piles of junk littered the main bay. Wires sparked faintly where they poked out of busted panels, and the walls were streaked with grime that might have been rust or might have been something worse. Through the cracked viewport, the void stared back, black and endless, dotted with stars that felt a million miles away. "Home, sweet damn home," he muttered, his voice rough and low, bouncing off the metal like a ricochet. He dropped his duffel bag onto the floor with a heavy thud, the sound swallowed by the cavernous space, and kicked it against a wall. The bag held everything he owned now: 6 beers, a plasma pistol that hadn't fired straight in years, and a deck of cards so worn the ace of spades was just a smudge. Jake figured that was about right for a guy like him, a drunk with nothing left but a few vices and a death wish. He'd come here to fade out, to let the galaxy forget him the way he'd forgotten himself after the Orion War. No more battles, no more medals, no more barflies asking for stories about how he took down those Zarian ships. Just him, the quiet, and enough beer to drown the past. But as he stood there, the station's eerie stillness pressed in, heavier than he'd expected, like it was waiting for something or someone. Shaking off the thought, Jake wandered deeper into the bay, his boots crunching over shards of broken glass and twisted metal. The place was bigger than it looked from the outside, a maze of corridors and chambers branching off the main hub like the guts of some giant beast. He ran a hand along a wall, feeling the cold steel under his fingers, pitted and scarred from years of neglect. "Bet this thing's seen more action than I have," he said aloud, chuckling dryly. The laugh didn't last. Truth was, he hadn't seen real action since the war, unless you counted bar fights and dodging creditors. The station's decay mirrored his own. Once mighty, now a husk, left to rot at the edge of nowhere. For a second, he wondered who'd built it, what it had been used for, but then he shrugged. "Doesn't matter," he muttered. "It's mine now, my own private graveyard." He found a busted crate tucked against a corner, its lid cracked open, and pried it apart with his hands. Inside was a pile of junk, old tools, a dented canteen, and a stash of alien beer cans, their labels faded to illegible squiggles. "Jackpot!" Jake grinned, pulling one out. The can was warm and probably flat as hell, but he popped it anyway, grimacing as the bitter, stale fizz hit his tongue. "Tastes like regret," he said, but drank it down regardless. Waste not, want not. That was the Spacer's code, and he'd lived by it longer than most. He tossed the empty can over his shoulder, letting it clatter into the shadows, and kept moving, the station's hum growing louder the deeper he went. The main bay opened into a narrower hallway, its ceiling sagging under the weight of time. Dim lights flickered overhead, casting long shadows that danced across the walls like ghosts. Jake's buzz was fading, replaced by a dull ache behind his eyes, but he pushed on, curiosity tugging at him despite himself. He wasn't sure what he was looking for. Maybe a bunk to crash on, maybe a viewport with a better view of the stars. But the station felt alive in a way he couldn't pin down. The hum wasn't just machinery. It was a pulse, steady and low, vibrating through the floor into his bones. He stopped, tilting his head to listen, and muttered, "What the hell are you up to, you old wreck?" The station didn't answer, but the hum ticked up a notch, like it was teasing him. Halfway down the hall, he stumbled on a hatch set into the wall, its edges rusted shut. He wedged his fingers under the lip and yanked, grunting as it gave way with a screech of metal on metal. Inside was a small chamber, barely bigger than a closet, packed with dust-covered equipment he didn't recognize. Curved panels, glowing faintly, and a tangle of crystalline rods that shimmered like frozen starlight. In the center stood something that made him pause, A jukebox, or at least that's what he called in his head. It was tall, about chest high, made of sleek, polished metal that didn't match the station's decay. Its surface was studded with those same crystalline rods, arranged in rows like the keys of some alien piano, and a faint blue glow pulsed from within, syncing with the hum he'd been hearing. What in the galaxy? Jake trailed off, stepping closer. He'd seen a lot of weird tech in his day, Zarian shield generators, black market grab bombs, but this was something else. You look like a karaoke machine got drunk and hooked up with a spaceship, he said, grinning despite the unease creeping up his spine. He reached out, brushing a finger along one of the crystals, and it let out a soft chime, clear and sharp like a glass bell. The sound hung in the air, sending a shiver through him he couldn't explain. For a moment, he felt something stir, a flicker of the old Jake, the one who lived for the thrill of a fight, the roar of engines, the rush of outsmarting death. Then it was gone, buried under years of booze and burnout. He pulled a fresh beer from his jacket pocket, cracked it open, and took a long pull, the cold liquid grounding him. "All right, let's see what you've got," he said, wiping his mouth. Half drunk and reckless, he slammed the bottle down on the jukebox's edge, the way he'd bang tables and bars to demand a song. The impact sent a jolt through the machine, and it woke up. A low rumble started deep inside, growing into a buzz that rattled his teeth. The crystals lit up, one by one, their glow shifting from blue to a blinding white, and a sound erupted. Not music, not exactly, but a deep, throbbing pulse that hit him like a shockwave. Jake stumbled back, beer sloshing over his hand, as the floor beneath him shook hard enough to knock him off balance. "Son of a," he started, but the words were drowned out by a piercing screech that ripped through the chamber. Through the hatch, he saw the main bay light up, the giant rings outside the station flaring to life. Their edges glowed green, then red, spinning faster than they had any right to, casting wild shadows across the walls. Jake lurched to the viewport, pressing his face against the cracked glass, and watched as waves of energy pulsed outward from the rings, distorting the stars beyond like heat ripples on a desert road. "What the hell did I just do?" he muttered, his buzz replaced by a cold knot of dread. He'd flown through worse. Plasma storms, enemy barges, but this felt different, like he'd kicked a hornet's nest the size of a planet. Back in the chamber, the jukebox was going haywire, the crystals flashing in a chaotic rhythm, the sound building into something that wasn't just noise. It was a force pressing against his chest, making his ears ring. He staggered over, slamming his fist against it. "Shut up, you damn thing," he yelled, but only got louder, the pulse sinking with his heartbeat until he wasn't sure which was driving which. A control screen nearby flickered on, its surface smeared with grime, displaying a cascade of alien symbols, sharp angles and loops that meant nothing to him. Red warning lights blinked, urgent and angry, and Jake's gut told him he'd just tripped over something way bigger than a drunk's bad luck. He stepped back, breathing hard, beer still clutched in one hand like a lifeline. The station wasn't just a wreck. It was alive, and he'd poked it awake. "If I die here," he said, forcing a laugh that sounded more like a cough, "at least it'll be with a hell of a soundtrack." He took a defiant swig, staring at the jukebox as it thrummed with power, the glow spreading beyond the chamber into the station's bones. Outside, the rings spun faster, their light cutting through the void, and Jake felt the hairs on his neck stand up. Whatever he'd started wasn't stopping, and deep down, a part of him, the part that still remembered being a hero, wondered if he'd just stumbled into a fight he couldn't walk away from. Jake Drifter. Malone stood frozen in the small chamber, his beer-soaked hands still tingling from slamming the jukebox, staring at the chaotic light show he'd unleashed. The crystalline rods pulsed like a heartbeat on overdrive, their glow flooding the room with a blinding white that stung his eyes. The sound wasn't just sound anymore. It was a living thing, a deep, bone-rattling roar that shook the station's rusted walls and buzzed in his chest like a swarm of angry hornets. Through the hatch, the main bay was a mess of flashing colors, the giant rings outside spinning wild and throwing off sparks that lit up the void like a damn fireworks show gone wrong. He stumbled back to the viewport, pressing his face against the cracked glass, his breath fogging it up as he watched the energy waves twist the stars into smears. "I'm in deep shit," he muttered, the words half lost in the jukebox's relentless screech. He'd flown through plasma storms and dodged Zarian cannons. But this was something else, something that made his gut twist tighter than a cheap bottle cap. The floor lurched under him, a groan of metal echoing through the station as if it were waking up pissed off. Jake gripped the wall, beer sloshing over his boots, and cursed under his breath. "Come on, you piece of junk! Give me a break!" he yelled, but the jukebox didn't care. It just kept pumping out that unearthly noise, the crystals flashing faster, like they were counting down to something bad. The control screen nearby was a riot of red warnings, alien symbols scrolling so fast he couldn't even pretend to read them. He didn't need to. Red meant trouble in every language, and this was trouble with a capital T. He took a step toward the jukebox, raising his bottle like a club, ready to smash it to pieces, when the whole station jolted hard enough to send him sprawling. The viewport flared white, brighter than a supernova, and Jake shielded his eyes, heart pounding like a drum in a bar fight. When the light faded, he peeked through his fingers and saw something cutting through the void. A sleek, shark-shaped ship, its hull shimmering like liquid silver, slicing through the glowing center of the biggest ring. It moved with a grace that didn't match the chaos around it, engines humming a low, steady note as it glided into the bay and touched down with a soft thud that Jake felt more than heard. The ship's curves were organic, almost alive, nothing like the clunky junkers he'd flown in his day. "Well, I'll be damned," he said, lowering his beer. "Either I'm drunker than I thought, or someone's crashing my retirement party." The jukebox screeched again, a high-pitched wail that made his teeth ache, and he winced, wondering if he'd just invited the galaxy's angriest neighbor over for a beer. The ship's side split open with a hiss, a ramp unfurling like a tongue, and out stepped a figure that stopped Jake dead in his tracks. She was tall, damn near 6 feet, maybe more, with hair like a cascade of molten red, spilling over her shoulders and catching the station's flickering light like a wildfire. She wore a black bodysuit that hugged every curve like it was painted on, the glossy fabric clinging to a body that could have stopped a war or started one. Long legs strode down the ramp with purpose, her high-heeled boots clicking sharp against the steel. And when she turned her head, Jake caught a glimpse of eyes green as a nebula, sharp and piercing under arched brows. Her lips, full and red, were set in a hard line, and in her right hand, she held a plasma rifle, its barrel glowing faintly with a charge that said she wasn't here to chat. "Holy hell," Jake breathed, his buzz evaporating faster than spit on a hot engine. "Who ordered the galactic pinup?" She stormed across the bay, her movements fluid and deadly, like a predator zeroing in on prey, and aimed the rifle straight at Jake's chest as he stumbled out of the chamber to meet her. "Who are you, and why the hell did you touch the culling gate?" she snapped, her voice low and husky, dripping with authority and just enough venom to make Jake's knees wobble. Not that he'd admit it. He blinked, caught off guard, then raised his hand slow, beer still dangling from one like a peace offering. "Name's Jake Malone," he said, forcing a grin that felt more like a grimace. "New owner of this dump. And you are Miss Universe? 'Cause damn, you're lighting up my graveyard here." Her eyes narrowed, green fire flashing as she stepped closer, the rifle's muzzle hovering an inch from his heart. "I'm Vara Kael, Galactic Alliance enforcer," she said, each word clipped and cold. "And you dumb bastard, just woke up a weapon that can wipe out 20 light years of space. So cut the crap and tell me how you got your grubby hands on this place." Jake opened his mouth, then closed it, his brain scrambling to catch up. The jukebox behind him let out another shriek, and the station shook again, a chunk of ceiling crashing down a few feet away. He flinched, but Vara didn't even blink, just kept that rifle steady, her gaze locked on him like a hawk on a rabbit. "Look, lady," he said, wiping sweat off his brow with his sleeve, "I bought this heap off the darknet for pocket change. Thought it'd be a nice spot to drink myself dead. Didn't know it came with a damn doomsday button." He jerked a thumb at the jukebox, its crystals now strobing like a rave gone wrong. Vara's head snapped toward it, her lips parting slightly, and for the first time, he saw a flicker of something, surprise, maybe fear, cross her face. "You activated it?" she hissed, lowering the rifle just enough to make Jake think he might live another minute. "Do you have any idea what that thing is?" He shrugged, taking a defiant sip of beer. "A jukebox? Hell if I know. I hit it. It started screaming. Figured it was just pissed I didn't tip." Vara didn't laugh. She shoved past him, her shoulder brushing his hard enough to knock him sideways, and stormed into the chamber, her boots echoing like gunfire. Jake followed, half stumbling, his eyes stuck on the way that bodysuit moved, tight and sleek, leaving nothing to the imagination. "Focus, you idiot," he muttered to himself, shaking his head. She knelt by the jukebox, running a hand over the crystals, her fingers long and graceful even in the chaos. "This isn't a toy, you moron," she said without looking up. "It's the control core for the culling gate, a relic from the Zarian Wars. One wrong move, and it'll rip this sector apart, us included." Jake leaned against the wall, crossing his arms. "Sounds like a Tuesday," he quipped, but his stomach dropped as the station shuddered again, harder this time. He glanced out the viewport and froze. The void outside wasn't just black anymore, it was cracking. Thin, jagged lines spread through the dark like shattered glass, and beyond them, tiny black holes sparked to life, sucking in light and spitting out nothing. The stars flickered, some winking out completely, and the rings spun faster, their glow turning a sickly purple that made his skin crawl. Vara," he said, his voice cracking despite his best effort to sound cool. "That normal?" She shot to her feet, spinning to the window, and cursed in a language he didn't know but could tell wasn't polite. "No, it's not normal," she snapped, grabbing his arm and yanking him back to the jukebox. "The gate's destabilizing space-time. We've got maybe 15 minutes before this whole damn sector collapses into a singularity." Jake blinked, her grip tight on his bicep, her nails digging in just enough to snap him out of his daze. "Singularity? Like black hole shit?" he asked, as was long gone now. "Worse," she said, her green eyes locking on his, fierce and unyielding. "Think of it as a cosmic shredder, everything in 20 light years gone. Planets, ships, us. And you turn it on, you jackass." He raised his hands again, beer sloshing. "Hey, I didn't sign up for this. I just wanted a quiet place to die, not take half the galaxy with me." Vara's lips twitched, almost a smirk, but it vanished as the station rocked again, a deep groan rising from its core. She shoved the rifle into a holster on her thigh. Jake couldn't help noticing how it hugged her curves, and turned back to the jukebox, her hands flying over the crystals. "The gate needs a specific frequency to operate," she said, voice tight with focus. "Your clumsy ass somehow triggered it, but it's out of sync now, tearing reality apart. We need to shut it down." Jake stepped closer, peering over her shoulder, catching a whiff of her scent, wildflowers and gunpowder, a mix that hit him harder than the beer. "So what, we just flip a switch?" he asked, half joking. She shot him a glare that could have melted steel. "No switch, genius. We need to reverse the frequency, or we're toast. And since you started this, you're helping me fix it." Before he could argue, the station bucked like a wild horse, throwing them both against the wall. Jake caught her by the waist on instinct, his hands landing on the smooth curve of her hips, and for a split second, he forgot the galaxy was ending. She shoved him off, her cheeks flushing just enough to notice, and pointed at the jukebox. "Move, Malone," she barked. "Hit those crystals hard. I'll guide you." Jake rubbed his jaw, still feeling her shove, and cracked his knuckles. "All right, hot shot," he said, stepping up. "But if we die, I'm blaming you for showing up late." He slammed his hand down, the crystals shrieking back, and outside, the cracks in space grew wider, the black holes humming with a hunger that made his blood run cold. The station shuddered like a ship caught in a meteor storm, steel groaning under Jake Drifter Malone's boots as he stood over the jukebox, its crystalline rods screaming with a sound that drilled into his skull. Vara Kael pressed against him, her body tense and warm through that damn black bodysuit, her green eyes blazing as she barked orders over the chaos. Hit the crystals, Malone, hard. We've got 10 minutes before this sector's nothing but a memory. Her voice cut through the noise like a plasma blade, sharp and urgent, and Jake felt her breath hot on his neck as she leaned in, guiding his hands. The air was thick with static, the station's walls trembling as cracks spiderwebbed across the viewport. Black holes outside growing fat and hungry, swallowing starlight like it was happy hour at the Rusty Nebula. Jake's head spun, not from beer this time, but from the sheer insanity of it all. I'm a pilot, not a damn rock star, he shouted, slamming his palm down on the crystals anyway. A jolt shot up his arm, the rods flaring white-hot, and the jukebox let out a wail that sounded like a banshee hooked up to a busted amp. He winced, ears ringing, but Vara grabbed his wrist, her grip iron-tight, and yanked it to another crystal. Not like that. You oaf, she snapped, her fingers brushing his rough skin as she forced him into a rhythm. Follow my lead, short bursts, then hold the tall one. Her hair, that wild cascade of red, whipped across his face as she moved, and Jake caught a whiff of her scent. Wildflowers and gunpowder, a combo that hit him like a shot of adrenaline. Short bursts. Huh, he grunted, smacking the crystals in quick succession, each strike sending a pulse through the chamber. Sounds like my love life. Vara's lips twitched, almost a smirk, but she didn't miss a beat, her hands dancing over the jukebox like she was born to tame it. Focus, Malone, she shot back, her voice husky over the roar. You're not charming enough to die yet. He laughed, a raw, barking sound that cut through the tension and kept hitting the crystals, sweat dripping down his brow. The station rocked again, a chunk of ceiling crashing down inches from his boots, but he didn't flinch, not with her right there, her shoulder brushing his, her heat keeping him grounded. Outside, the void was a nightmare. The cracks in space widened, jagged lines glowing purple as black holes spun faster, pulling at the station with a force Jake could feel in his bones. The giant rings whirled like buzzsaws gone rogue, their light pulsing in sync with the jukebox's chaos. This thing's gonna tear us apart, he yelled, glancing at the viewport. Vara didn't look up, her eyes locked on the crystals, but she nodded, grim and fierce. Not if we sync it right, she said, her tone all business. The gate's frequency is off. Your dumbass hit triggered a cascade. We need to reverse it, stabilize the field. She pointed at a row of short crystals, then a towering one in the back. 3 quick, then hold that big bastard now. Jake didn't argue. He slapped the short ones, pop, 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 like he was drumming on a bar counter, then leaned in, pressing both hands on the tall crystal. It vibrated under his palms, a deep hum rising that shook his teeth, and the jukebox responded, its screech softening into something almost melodic. Vara slid in beside him, her hip bumping his as she worked the other side, her fingers flying over the rods with a precision he couldn't hope to match. Good, she muttered, close enough that he felt her breath on his cheek. Keep it steady. Don't you dare let go. He grinned, despite the sweat stinging his eyes. Wouldn't dream of it, sweetheart. You're the boss here. She shot him a look, half glare, half something else, and the air between them crackled, not just from the gate's energy. Less talk, more hitting, she said, but there was a spark in her green eyes that hadn't been there before. Jake's hands moved faster, muscle memory kicking in from years of dodging fire and tweaking engines. He didn't know squat about frequencies or alien tech, but he knew rhythm, knew how to feel a ship's pulse and ride it through hell. And this, crazy as it was, felt like flying again, like he was back in Rusty Betty, weaving through Zarian flak with nothing but guts and luck. Come on, you son of a bitch, he growled at the jukebox, pounding the crystals harder. Sing for me. The station answered with a lurch, the floor tilting as another tremor hit. Vara stumbled, crashing into Jake, and he caught her by the waist, his hands landing on those sleek curves again. She didn't pull away this time, just braced herself against him, her chest heaving as she caught her breath. Nice catch, she said, voice low and dry, and Jake smirked. Old pilot trick, never let the good stuff slip. She rolled her eyes, but her hand lingered on his arm a second longer than it needed to before she pushed off back to the jukebox. "Flatter yourself later," she said. "We're not done." The crystals glowed brighter, their hum rising into a chord that filled the chamber, and Jake felt it, a shift like the universe was holding its breath. Through the viewport, the black holes slowed, their edges blurring as the cracks in space started to shrink. "It's working," Vara shouted, her voice cutting through the noise with a mix of relief and urgency. "Keep going, 2 more sequences." She called out patterns, short, long, short, then a double tap on the middle rods, and Jake followed, his hands a blur, adrenaline pumping like it hadn't in years. "Short, long, what now?" he yelled, fumbling a beat, and she grabbed his wrist again, guiding him with a force that made his pulse jump. "Like this, damn it," she said, her touch firm but electric, and together they hit the crystals, their movements syncing up like a dance neither had rehearsed but both knew by heart. The jukebox's sound shifted, the chaos smoothing into a steady pulse that vibrated through the station's bones. Jake's arms burned, his knuckles raw from slamming the rods, but he didn't stop. Not with Vara beside him, her red hair plastered to her neck with sweat, her bodysuit gleaming under the flickering lights. "You're not half bad at this," she said, panting as she worked, and he shot back. "Yeah, well, I'm a quick learner when the galaxy's on the line." She snorted, a sound that was almost a laugh, and the tension between them flared hotter than the gate's energy. "Don't get cocky," she warned, but her eyes flicked to his, and for a split second he saw something, admiration, maybe, or just the thrill of not being dead yet. The station steadied, the tremors fading as the rings outside slowed their frantic spin. The purple glow dimmed, replaced by a soft blue that washed over the bay like a calm tide. Jake risked a glance at the viewport. The black holes were shrinking fast, the cracks sealing up like wounds knitting shut, and the stars peeked through again, steady and bright. "Holy shit," he breathed, hands still pressed to the crystals, the hum now a low, soothing drone. Vara leaned over the jukebox, checking a readout he hadn't noticed before, her face lit by its faint glow. "Cascades reversing," she said, voice tight with focus. "One more push. Hit the tall one, full force, and hold it." Jake nodded, wiping sweat off his face with his sleeve, and slammed both palms down on the tallest crystal. It sang, a deep, resonant note that rippled out, shaking dust from the ceiling, and the jukebox went quiet, its glow fading to a soft flicker. The station settled, the floor solid under his boots again, and the silence hit like a punch after all that noise. Vara slumped against the wall, her chest rising and falling fast, sweat beading on her collarbone where the bodysuit dipped low. Jake staggered back, catching his breath, and looked at her, really looked. She was a mess, hair wild, suit scuffed, but damn if she didn't still look like trouble wrapped in a dream. "Did we just save the galaxy?" he asked, voice hoarse, leaning on the jukebox like it was an old friend. Vara pushed off the wall, brushing hair from her face, and met his gaze with those piercing green eyes. "This corner of it, yeah," she said, a faint smirk tugging at her lips. "No thanks to your drunk ass stumbling into it." He laughed, a real laugh this time, rough and free, and rubbed his aching hands. "Guess I still got it," he said, flexing his fingers. "Pilot instincts, beat the odds, save the day." She raised an eyebrow, stepping closer, her boots clicking slow and deliberate. "Instincts, huh? More like dumb luck and a hard head." Jake grinned, not backing down as she stopped inches away, her heat cutting through the station's chill. "Takes both to survive out here," he said, voice dropping low. "And maybe a hotshot partner who knows her stuff." Vara's smirk widened, but she didn't reply, just stood there, breathing steady, her presence filling the space between them. The gate was quiet, the rings still, the stars shining through the viewport like nothing had happened. But something had shifted, and Jake felt it, a spark, buried deep, flickering back to life after years in the dark. The silence in the station was deafening after the jukebox's chaotic symphony, a heavy quiet that settled over Jake, drifter Malone like a blanket. He leaned against the now dormant machine, its crystalline rods dark and still, his hands raw and aching from pounding them into submission. Sweat stung his eyes, his leather jacket clung to his back, and his breath came in short, ragged bursts, but he was alive. Damn it, he was alive, and so was the galaxy, or at least this corner of it. Across the chamber, Vara Kael slumped against the wall, her red hair a tangled mess plastered to her neck, her black bodysuit scuffed and streaked with dust, but still hugging her curves like it was defying gravity itself. Her chest heaved as she caught her breath, and those green eyes, sharp as ever, flicked up to meet his, carrying a mix of exhaustion and something else. Maybe respect, maybe just relief that they weren't both cosmic dust. Jake wiped his brow with his sleeve, the faint smell of beer and metal lingering on his skin, and broke the silence with a hoarse chuckle. "So, what's the verdict, hotshot?" he asked, gesturing vaguely at the jukebox and the viewport beyond, where the stars shone steady again, no black holes or cracked space in sight. "Did we just save the galaxy? Or is this place going to blow up in 5 minutes anyway?" Vara pushed off the wall, brushing a lock of hair from her face, and stalked toward him, her boots clicking slow and deliberate on the steel floor. "This sector's safe," she said, her voice low and husky, still rough from shouting over the chaos. "The culling gate stabilized for now. No thanks to you stumbling into it like a drunk bull in a tech shop." He grinned, unbothered by the jab, and crossed his arms, the leather creaking. "Hey, I'm the guy who kept up with your fancy frequency dance," he said, nodding at the jukebox. "Give credit where it's due. These hands." He held them up, knuckles red and bruised. "Hero material." Vara stopped a foot away, close enough that he could feel the heat radiating off her, and raised an eyebrow, her lips twitching into a smirk that made his pulse kick up a notch. "Hero, huh," she said, her tone dry as a Martian desert. More like a lucky idiot with a hard head and a death wish. But she tilted her head, studying him like he was a puzzle she hadn't quite cracked. "You didn't screw it up. That's something." Jake laughed, a rough, genuine sound that echoed off the chamber's walls, and for the first time in years, it didn't feel forced. "High praise from Miss Galactic Enforcer," he said, leaning closer, just enough to test the waters. "Careful, Vara. You keep talking like that, I might think you like me." Her smirk widened, but she didn't step back, her green eyes locking on his with a spark that wasn't all business. "Don't flatter yourself, Malone," she said, but there was a playful edge to her voice, a crack in that ironclad armor. "You smell like a brewery and look like you slept in a dumpster. I've got standards." He clutched his chest, mock wounded, but his grin didn't falter. "Ouch, straight to the heart," he said, then patted his jacket, pulling out a crumpled pack of smokes he'd forgotten he had. He offered her one, half expecting her to wave it off, but she surprised him, snatching it with a quick, graceful move and letting him light it with a flick of his old Zippo. The flame lit up her face for a second. Sharp cheekbones, full lips, a faint scar curving along her jaw, and Jake had to remind himself to breathe. She took a drag, exhaling a thin stream of smoke, and handed the lighter back. "Not bad," she said, nodding at the cigarette. "For a human." "Human's all I got," he said, lighting his own and taking a pull, the nicotine hitting his system like an old friend. "Well, it's enough to get the job done, right?" He gestured at the jukebox, the station, the whole damn mess they'd just pulled through. Vara didn't reply right away, just stood there, smoking, her eyes drifting to the viewport where the rings outside hung quiet, their faint blue glow a reminder of how close they'd come to oblivion. The silence stretched, comfortable but charged, and Jake felt something shift inside him, a flicker of the man he used to be, the one who flew into hell and came out laughing. She broke the moment, tossing her cigarette to the floor and grinding it out with her boot. "The Alliance wants you," she said, turning to face him, her tone all business again but softer, like she was weighing her words. "You proved you're not completely useless. They need someone to keep an eye on this station, make sure no other idiot trips over the gate." She paused, her smirk returning. "Pay's good, benefits are better, and, since I know it's your love language, free beer for life." Jake's eyebrows shot up, and he let out a low whistle. "Free beer? Damn, You're speaking my language now. He rubbed his stubble, pretending to think it over, but the truth was his mind was already racing. A job, a purpose, hell, a reason to get up in the morning that wasn't just chasing the next buzz. It was more than he'd had in years. Hold up, he said, squinting at her. What's the catch? You don't strike me as the type to hand out cushy gigs to random drunks. Vara crossed her arms, the bodysuit stretching just enough to make Jake's focus waver, and leaned against the jukebox. No catch, she said. Well, one, you're stuck with me. I'm assigned to this sector, so we'll be working together. Think you can handle that, Drifter? Her voice was teasing, but there was a challenge in her eyes, daring him to step up or back down. Jake met her gaze, his grin slow and cocky. Handle you? Lady, I just saved the galaxy with a hangover. You're the one who's got to keep up. She laughed. A real laugh, short and sharp, that lit up her face and made the station feel less like a tomb. We'll see, she said, pushing off the jukebox and heading for the hatch. Come on, Malone. Let's get out of this closet and figure out what we're dealing with. He followed, his boots clanging behind her, and as they stepped into the main bay, the station felt different, still a wreck, but not a grave anymore. The rings outside glowed faintly, their hum a quiet promise of secrets yet to be uncovered, and Jake's chest tightened with something he hadn't felt since the war. Possibility. They made their way to a control room off the bay, its screens flickering with data. Vara seemed to understand better than he did. She tapped a console, pulling up a star map, and started rattling off details, security protocols, alliance contracts, maintenance schedules. Jake half listened, more focused on the way her hair caught the light, the way her voice carried a strength that made him want to be better than the drunk he'd become. Hey, he interrupted, leaning on the console, close enough to catch her scent again. Before you bury me in paperwork, you said something about my old gambling days. What was that about? He'd caught her mention of his lost bet at the Rusty Nebula, how it had screwed over some Zarian smugglers, and he wasn't letting it slide. Vara glanced at him, her smirk returning as she shut off the screen. Oh, that? She said, crossing her arms. That bet you lost. The one that cost you your savings? It wasn't just bad luck. The guy you played was running weapons for a Zarian remit cell. Your loss tanked their deal, forced them to scatter. You didn't know it, but you've been screwing up their plans for years, Drifter. She leaned closer, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. You're a walking wrench in the galaxy's gears, Malone. Always have been. Jake stared at her, then threw his head back and laughed, the sound bouncing off the control room's walls. You're telling me I've been a hero by sucking at cards? He said, shaking his head. That's a new one. He ran a hand through his hair, still processing, and for the first time, the weight of his failures felt lighter, like maybe they'd been leading him here, to this moment, this station, this woman who looked at him like he wasn't just as been. Vara watched him, her expression softening, and nodded. Call it what you want, she said, but you're here now, and you're not done yet. They left the control room, heading for the station's outer deck, a wide platform overlooking the rings and the endless stars. Jake grabbed 2 beers from his bag, tossing one to Vara, who caught it without looking, her reflexes sharp as ever. They sat on the edge, legs dangling over the void, the cold cans sweating in their hands as they cracked them open. The stars stretched out forever, a glittering sea that made the station feel small but alive, like it was part of something bigger. Jake took a long pull, the fizz sharp on his tongue, and glanced at Vara. She was staring at the stars, her profile strong and fierce, but there was a quiet to her now, a stillness that made her seem almost human despite her otherworldly edge. You know, she said, not looking at him, if you cleaned up a bit, ditched the brewery smell, maybe shaved that scruff, I might rethink that whole standards thing. Her voice was light, teasing, but her eyes flicked to his, and the spark there hit him like a plasma bolt. Jake chuckled, leaning back on his hands, the steel cool under his palms. Vara, I'm a pilot, not a damn model, he said, but his grin was softer, warmer. Besides, you'd miss the scruff. Gives me character, she snorted, sipping her beer, and nudged his shoulder with hers, just hard enough to feel intentional. Character's one word for it, she said, but didn't pull away. They sat there, drinking in the quiet, the stars their only witness. For Jake, the station wasn't a tomb anymore. It was a second chance, a place to rebuild, to fight, to live. With Vara beside him, a partner as fierce as any he'd flown with, in a galaxy full of trouble waiting, he felt the old fire in his gut flare back to life. "To new beginnings," he said, raising his can. Vara clinked hers against it, her smirk promising more than words could. "To surviving your dumb ass," she replied, and they drank, the future wide open and theirs to claim.